welcome to the Bruno e Linzio transmission. Linzio, do you have something to say in Italiano?
Sì, sì, ciao di nuovo, caro Bruno, a Milano. Sono felice di rivederti. Sei pronto per l'episodio 8? Già? 8?
Yes, I am ready for episode number 8.
Did we get there so soon?
Yes, indeed. 1 week at a time.
Well, my style advisor slash dictator will be delighted to see that we're both in black this week. Her command to me that I had to wear black every week sent me diving into my wardrobe, digging up apparel that I'd completely forgotten about, hadn't seen in years. So now you have to ask me what's on the back of this one, which will tell you how old it must be.
Let's hear it.
You'll love parts of this. Heaven is where the police are British. That really dates it. The cooks, Italiani. The mechanics, German. The lovers, French. And everything is organized by the Swiss. Hell is where the chefs are British, the mechanics French, the lovers Swiss, the police German, and everything is organized by the Italians. And I thought one could add to that, and hell is also where T-shirts are sold in New Zealand. I assume I got this in New Zealand at some stage. But they're made in sweatshops in communist China, applauded by the Ayn Rand Institute. And indeed, I checked the label. Guess what it said? Made in China.
Of course it did. Of course it did. China is our greatest economic partner for all of our countries, as a matter of fact.
And they're also card-carrying libertarians. I mean, what a poster model for objectivism is the regime in China. It has liberalized so much since we started all that free trade where they can impose tariffs, but we can't.
Of course. Speaking of China, I just read that Australia has decided, along with the United States, to open a base in, I think, Papua New Guinea or somewhere around there. I'm not so good at geography way down there where y'all live. But essentially, there is an arm race going on between China and the Western world. And, well, China seems to be in a pretty good position after all.
Well, you know, they have this aspiration to be #1 in the world by 2049, and part of that involves a significant expansion into the Pacific. They've infiltrated Australia, they've infiltrated New Zealand, and we recently had a minor scandal here where an opposition national party, the opposition national party leader, was exposed as having made a financial arrangement with a big businessman from China in exchange for ensuring that I think at least 1 extra, maybe 2 extra members of parliament at the next election would be Chinese. It's all very cunning. And this is actually the party, the National Party, for which I voted last time because I was determined to do whatever it took to keep out the Labour Party. But actually, on issues like this, the Labour Party is more, dare I say, nationalistic than the National Party, which is just open to all comers. And I realise in hindsight that I've been a little bit naive on this issue. Communist China has been diligently working away towards this objective for a number of years, aided and abetted by the government, which was until recently a national government, this Labour government's been in power for about a year in coalition with the Greens. Now, it's bad enough, and I'll talk about our Prime Minister presently, but the National Party has been selling our national interest, and I don't care about Yuan Book. We are entitled to use terms such as the national interest with impunity, and they have validity. The National Party has been busy selling us down the river. Same thing has been going on in Australia. And both countries, incidentally, are sitting idly by while we are subject to Islamization. So there's nothing new under the sun in recent times. I guess there never has been. But everything that's going on in the world at large is also going on down here in Australia and New Zealand.
Well, my only question is just how woke Australians and New Zealanders are on you know, the questions that have arisen in the United States and Europe, especially with all the migration, because it seems very weird to me that the Chinese government would ask that two Chinese people be put on. Is that correct? Did I get you right? Be
Yeah, that's real, but none of it was public. Understand that. This all came out in the wash of this. It is a scandal unrelated, actually, to matters of foreign influence, but it came out in the wash, and who knows what else has been going on that we don't know about. So again, I say that party won't get my vote again. It was the first time I'd ever voted for it. I had up until that time called them the National Socialists because although they purported to be on the right, they were a typical establishment so-called right-wing party that just went along with everything the left did when it was in power. When National took power, it left everything in place and in many cases made it worse. On this occasion, the Labour Party had been taken over by the far left, much as has occurred with the Democrats in the United States. And so I was prepared just to hold my nose, cover my eyes, turn my head the other way and pretend reality wasn't reality if it came to keeping the social justice warriors out. In the end, the strategy didn't work, and in the end, it turned out that a vote for the National Party was a vote for really terrible, treasonous, unprincipled, opportunist pragmatists, in other words, politicians. They don't alter across the board. We don't have a single one here for whom I would say I had a skerrick of respect.
Yes, well, you're missing the, you haven't been trumped yet. You need a Trump. Just like...
You need a Salvini, and beyond that, really, you have to go back into the past to find people that you could actually look up to and admire and say these were people of stature. You know, when I was a kid, and I was a political junkie at 8 years old and would go down to Parliament in Wellington and sit in the public gallery, I was in absolute awe. We did have giants in politics, whatever you think about their political principles. But as human beings, they were giants. They were articulate, intelligent, coherent. They advocated for principle, whether you agreed with it or not, and stood by that, by and large, at least to a much greater degree than occurs now. They were people that you could go away and say, well, the whole business of politics might suck, but I respect these people for their stature as human beings. Now, I think you know what I would call all of them. I know it's a term of which you disapprove, but that is the way I look at them.
Yes, I think we all know what the word is. No, but it's interesting because I think when I mentioned that you need a Trump, you need a Salvini, what I mean by that is that with Trump and Salvini, it's not so much that the policies themselves have shifted radically, although there are some differences. What has changed is the culture of the right, on the right. I think the whole Western world has been ruled by wherever the right-wing parties were in charge. this very soft liberal left, sort of, but camouflaged as the right. And one of the questions now is the national question. I mean, if these Chinese people entering Parliament in New Zealand are New Zealanders just like anyone else, why would the Chinese government want them in? That is my question, and I wish people would start thinking more in these terms, because if we get this wrong, there's no going back. If we get the if the Greens get some silly laws passed, you can get rid of those laws. But what happens if your population gets replaced? I mean, you can't get back from that.
Well, it's going to be an interesting competition, is it not, between the Chinese and the Muslims. Who gets us first? Now, at the moment, to some extent, they're working in tandem. And as you know, I use the term islamo-marxism because there is this unholy alliance between these two wholly evil forces going on at the moment. And I think that's because, for the time being, their agendas coincide. But of course, at some point, they will conflict sharply, and the inherent differences between them will come to the fore. And Islam, in particular, does not allow for any deviation. And Marxism, as embodied by the Chinese regime, is not reconcilable, other than in the most fundamental way, in the sense of extreme irrationality. But in terms of the details of its beliefs, it is not reconcilable with Islam. Nothing is reconcilable with Islam, because there is only Islam. It is the one truth which must be imposed worldwide in a caliphate via jihad and Sharia law. But at the moment, they seem to be working together. At the forefront of the battle against free speech in New Zealand are both or should I say the Marxists and the Muslims, Islamo-Marxism. They appear to be working independently, but between them, they managed to stop the event that was to have been held by Stefan and Lauren a few weeks back. Initially, it was the Muslims who got the mayor of Auckland to ban their appearance at a particular venue, and at that point it appeared there was no point their coming here at all if there was no venue. Then a private venue owner offered his premises, and then it was the Marxists, I believe, although we're not entirely sure, who got to the venue owner and scared the bejesus out of him at the last minute, and so he cancelled the event. So Stefan and Lauren were actually here in New Zealand by that time, but they had nowhere to speak except out in the street. But, you know, it was a combined effort. I think they worked independently, but effectively in tandem as well. And given that we don't have the full information publicly as to what went on behind the scenes, it's impossible to say which of the two was the dominant force. But they're both very, very evil. They're both trying very hard. And of course, to your point about how woke are we, we're not woke at all. Everyone's asleep. And so it's very easy to be pessimistic, as I tend to be occasionally, as you know, about how it's all going to work out. I have to say I was encouraged, though, today by the news out of the States that Bill Nelson, evil serial power luster Democrat, he's conceded in Florida. You know, he's been in political office of some kind since 1972, so he hasn't left home. And what fascinated me was that awful Crooked Hillary's lawyer, Mark Elias, went down to Florida to help out with the recount, and by his own trumpeted ambition wanted to not just make sure the vote was accurate, but to make sure the result was overturned and that it went back to Bill Nelson. Now, that's the same Mark Elias who was instrumental in commissioning the fake Golden Shower dossier for Hillary Clinton on Donald Trump that they've used throughout this fake Russian collusion scandal. So they tried every trick in the book, which included, I note, counting the votes of illegals. They insisted that where they could identify votes as having come from illegal aliens, Mark Elias insisted that they be counted. Most of the rest of the time they tell us, no, illegals never vote. They never cast votes at all. But here they were saying, yes, well, that's an illegal vote, but you must count it anyway. So their true agenda came to light. One thing I did learn was that apparently the illegals who voted, of course, they had no voter ID, but they were brandishing some documents, and a closer inspection revealed that these were apology notes and amnesty certificates that were signed by one H. Binswanger on behalf of the Ayn Rand Institute. Anyway, that was all good today, and that social justice warrior Gillum, he got defeated, and the Republicans picked up Indiana and North Dakota. So that meant Joe Donnelly and Heidi Heitkamp went down. And that was interesting because I think they went down because of their refusal to support Brett Kavanaugh, which does tell you that out there in heartland America, there are still humans as opposed to subhumans. People decent enough to be outraged by the antics of these lying, screeching social justice females and all the males that they've managed to castrate. So that today did give me cause for hope, for optimism.
Yes, and Stacey Abrams.
Oh, yes.
The extreme left-wing social justice warrior, first black woman running for governor in Georgia, has failed and conceded the victory to Brian Kemp. By a very narrow margin, we must say, however. But Georgia is safe for now. However, Georgia, just like Texas and many other southern states, at the border, you know, there might be some correlation there. They seem to be swinging towards the Democrats inevitably, and it all has to do with this so-called coalition of the fringes. But they're not so fringe anymore if they have almost 50% of the votes. But it's you know, it involves putting LGBTQIS, ZXY, together with blacks, together with Muslims, together with Martians, and all of it. But it is a very precarious alliance, and I think what we're seeing is that the white Democrats, the old guard Democrats, you know, they thought that by being the defenders of the fringes that they would keep their positions. But we're seeing, like with this occasional Cortex woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she of course took the seat of some white Democrat that was there for decades, and you know, we now have these new, very smart, intelligent, and thoughtful people taking their place. Did you have anything to say about occasional Cortex?
I do have quite a bit to say about occasional Cortex. And I appreciate your sarcasm in referring to her as thoughtful and intelligent. I mean, she is as dumb as a rock. I don't think she even knew what it was she'd won. By the way, you know how a couple of weeks back I was talking about a survey that showed 3 out of 4 Americans don't know what the 3 branches of government are. Just before we started, I was watching another YouTube video by a guy called the Black Mike, M-I-C, the Black Mike, who's a very clued up black guy, and he was interviewing college students about what a republic is. Honestly, it was beyond excruciatingly embarrassing, just absolutely hideously awful. And it revalidates my call in that episode of Bruno e Linzio to disenfranchise morons. I mean, if you see these people, the best they can do, some of them, is distinguish a Republican from a Democrat. But that wasn't the question. The question was, what is a republic? So, and then when he tried to get on to what is a constitutional republic, a hopeless enterprise. But occasional cortex, the question I have is this. I haven't figured out the answer, but you've got occasional cortex. You've got this woman, Kamala Harris, a pea out of the same pod, another social justice warrior. During the week, between now and last week when we last spoke, she's a Democrat senator from the People's Republic of California. But did you see her grilling the nominee for the position of head of ICE, the new head of ICE? And she asked him whether he was aware of the perceived, get that, perceived similarity between ICE and the Ku Klux Klan. And she kept saying, I'm talking about the perception, I'm talking about the perception. It doesn't get much more insidious than that. She's attempting indirectly to equate the people who keep MS-13 out of America. She's attempting to equate them with the KKK, except she won't come out and say it. She says, are you aware there's a perception that they are similar? And it's really interesting to observe the corruption of modern epistemology creep in here. The question is not, is the perception accurate? The question is not, what is the actual reality here? It's the embrace of modern epistemology, which in essence says, well, there is no reality, and if there were, we couldn't perceive it. And if there were a reality and we could perceive it, we couldn't communicate it. That's the cynics from ancient Greece. But here it is again. Perception is reality. But how do they perceive even that? So when I watched this evil woman, I thought, I bet old Emmanuel, looking down from his noumenal dimension, is well pleased with the chaos that his epistemological devastation wrought. But here's my question. Kamala Harris, occasional cortex, and the New Zealand Prime Minister, whom you probably have never seen. But honestly, they could be triplets out of the womb of George Soros. They're identical. They're dumb as rocks, look like horses, and speak like ducks. So there must be a factory somewhere. If it's not George Soros's womb, there's got to be a factory producing these grotesquely deformed babies.
Yes, I'm afraid I've seen her.
There is such a factory. It's called universities. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I think you're right. Universities and anchor babies and all of that. I think it's modern epistemology, or modern quote-unquote epistemology. It's simply a tool for the statists. It's a tool. I mean, who does this woman think is creating the perception that ICE is the KKK? She is. She's the one. She's the one, and she knows it. Yes. She and CNN and all of them. They know perfectly well what they're doing, and we can see it's a concerted effort. If CNN puts out a narrative, everyone else picks it up. It's they're all in it. They're all in it together. It's not a conspiracy, everyone. You can just look at the headlines. You can just look at the news cycles. We can see it with our own eyes, and we can see who they kick out and who can stay. Who are the anchors? I mean, they're just floating heads that are filled by who knows who. People like George Soros and whoever else wants to take control of the government. But these people, they're just the fact is that their perception tricks, their narrative tricks, these work on people. And it's interesting that you bring up universities, because the universities are priming, they're creating the foundation for this misperception by people, because they're incapable of thinking once they get out of the whole educational system. While this whole, we can look at the narrative and this epistemology and say, no, that's ridiculous. There's only, there's only truth and there's reality, and truth is the recognition of reality. Most people live in sort of this, how can I say, social metaphysician bubble. That reality is constructed socially, and if everyone believes it, then it must be true. And especially, I think one of the tactics is to use use authority. So the left has infiltrated universities, it has infiltrated the social sciences, it has infiltrated the media, and so forth. So, and the Hollywood. I thought it was hilarious how what's her name, Taylor Swift, who never talked about politics, she somehow attacked Donald Trump and said vote for the Democrats. That right before she got the music award or whatever. So right before she gets the music award, she changes her mind and starts talking about politics. Do you see any relation between the two? And the point is that authority figures can have a very, very strong effect on the population. If it's a population that can't think for itself and trusts the authority, then they just have to become the authorities, as they have. People like us are in the, we're not in authority positions, and of course we can't get into the authority positions because they're well guarded.
Well, yes, they're only able to become authorities, as you say, if the masses are conditioned not to think for themselves, which is a process that is well and truly complete. Ayn Rand talked about the comprachicos. My goodness, I wonder if only she could have foreseen how devastatingly accurate that essay, which I think is one of her very best and most insightful, was in describing what had gone on. But even then, she could not have imagined how much worse it was going to become. And so the so-called bastions of free and original thought, critical thinking, what they are teaching is that critical thinking simply consists of breaking down the hidden racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia. God, you go to sleep just reciting it all. It is all so bloody tiresome. And these are supposed to be the intellectuals of our time. The challenge is well and truly on for us to produce new intellectuals, as Ayn Rand challenged us to do. But it's a little bit discouraging when the institute that exists in her name is part of the problem and has been corrupted by the same virus, and doesn't appear to be willing to do anything about it other than double down, as we've seen recently from Binswanger.
Well, I don't want to sound like a Christian, but I think it's time that people, sane people, as you say, the humans, recognize that there is such thing as evil. This whole group of people, this whole cultural milieu we're stewing in, it's evil. It's not simply mistaken, because people can be mistaken. That's fine, and I'm sure most of the leftists they don't even have the capacity to be mistaken. They're just programmed NPCs, so you can't even blame the NPCs because they have no brain. But the people behind all this are clearly have clearly evil motives. They are not simply, they didn't say, okay, let's find the correct epistemological theory that is, they don't really believe that reality is constructed by perception. What they believe is that if they teach this, they can take control. So it's time to recognize that when fighting the left, quote unquote, but it's much more than the left. It's everyone. I mean, it's the moderate right that is absolutely useless and, bought by the Chinese maybe. When fighting all of this, we have to realize that there are evil motives out there moving these people.
And we have to call them that in spite of the nervous Nelly qualms of people on secret societies on Feces book who will never dare come out in public, but who will criticize people like me for actually daring to call it evil. It is evil and must be called as such, and these people are diabolical, to use a religious term. All those religious terms have meaning and should be used. The content of our use of them is different from that of Christianity and all religions for sure, but we should not balk at using them. They are the only terms, in fact, strong enough to convey the urgency of the situation, the fundamentality of the situation, and the only way in which we might actually achieve something real in pushing back. Otherwise, we're just going to be drowned in a swamp of the consensus of the mediocre, the social metaphysicians, the social justice warriors, all just going along to get along and trying to see which one of them can screech more loudly than the other.
Yeah, and let me just get in one thing. I know where the time is up.
The bell rang.
Yes, about this diabolical issue, because Ayn Rand speaks that history is moved by ideas, and most great intellectuals have always thought this. But what the diabolical gives us is an idea that evil can be very stupid, and it's not moved by ideas. It's just moved slowly by one temptation after another, So I'll give you this position and you give me this favor, and okay, you say this and I'll give you the award, and so forth. So that the diabolical is a useful term in that sense, because it looks at evil not as refers to ideas, but as the more motivation. It's sub the idea realm, and let me just say while we end that the real KKK is Antifa and the rest of the leftist filth that will attack any conservative, including blacks, which they're supposed to be the spokesman of. We see what happens to black conservatives. We see what happens to any conservative. They are violent leftist filth that needs to be crushed by the police, quite frankly.
And we must call them pro-far because they're pro-fascist, not anti-fascist. They are the original Mussolini black shirts, say we, dressed in black. But truly, they are, their most recent antic, standing outside Tucker Carlson's house when he wasn't there, terrorizing his wife. Hey, Tucker Carlson, we will fight. We know where you sleep at night. Now, I don't hesitate to use the term subhuman. That is what pro-far are. It's what islamo-marxists are. And I'm afraid that includes the people purportedly operating within Ayn Rand's camp who offer them succor. I use that term of all of them on that cheerful note. Do you want to do the countdown this time?
Yes. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
3, 2, 1, MOGA!
MOGA! Make objectivism great again.
Thank you, Linzio.
Buonanotte.